10 seconds, counting.
9:47 a.m. Eastern Time, February 20th, 1962. The voice of Mission Control counts down the final seconds to the launch of the first American to orbit the Earth. But the countdown for Friendship 7 and John Glenn's historic journey into space began long before this day at Cape Canaveral, Florida. It began in the skies over the Pacific during World War II, and later over Korea, where as a Marine Corps and Air Force pilot, John Glenn flew 149 combat missions, earning the Distinguished Flying Cross 6 times. His achievements continued after the war as a Naval Air Test pilot. In 1957, he flew from Los Angeles to New York in a record-breaking 3 hours and 23 minutes, the first transcontinental flight to average better than the speed of sound. So in January 1959, when the newly created National Aeronautics and Space Administration began searching for test pilots for a program to put an American in space, it was no surprise that John Glenn's service record was one of 508 sent to the agency. On April 1st, 1959, the names of the first American astronauts, the Mercury 7, were announced. Among them was John H. Glenn, Jr. of New Concord, Ohio. If the process to be selected as an astronaut had been rigorous, the actual training would be even more demanding. A huge human centrifuge was used to help the astronauts learn to deal with the excessive G-forces they would have to endure during launch and re-entry. Planes flying special trajectories simulated the weightlessness of space so the astronaut trainees could get a sense of what it would be like to be free of Earth's gravity. Finally, after months of training and conditioning, the Mercury 7 astronauts were ready. And so was the Atlas rocket and capsule that would be used to put an American into orbit for the first time. NASA announced that John Glenn would be that American. Originally scheduled for January 16th, the flight of Friendship 7 would be delayed 11 times by weather or mechanical issues before the launch actually took place 5 weeks later. Just after 6 o'clock Eastern Time, on the morning of February 20th, John Glenn climbed through the hatchway of his spacecraft once again, wondering if this would be the day he had been waiting for. Even on this day, there would be 2 hours and 17 minutes of holds and delays. But then, nearly 4 hours after John Glenn had entered Friendship 7, the final countdown was underway.
T-minus 10 seconds, counting. 8, 7, 6, 5,
Godspeed,
4,
John Glenn.
3, 2,
There was
1,
the ignition of the burners.
0, ignition, liftoff.
Liftoff.
Operating, we're underway. Roger, reading you loud and clear. Won't be long about here.
In less than 5 minutes after liftoff, John Glenn and Friendship 7 were propelled into orbit, traveling over 17,500 miles an hour, 5 miles a second, more than 140 miles above the Earth. He would orbit the Earth 3 times, about once every 90 minutes, before splashing down in the Atlantic Ocean 800 miles southeast of Bermuda, not quite 5 hours after Friendship 7 had lifted off from Cape Canaveral. The journey was not without challenges and nervous moments for Mission Control and the millions who were following it on radio and television. Before the end of the first orbit, problems developed with the automatic control system. Glenn shut it down and piloted the spacecraft manually for the rest of the flight.
This is Friendship 7 controlling manually on fly-by-wire. Having no trouble controlling. Very smooth and easy. Controls very nicely.
During the second orbit, a sensor on board Friendship 7 sent a signal to Earth indicating that the spacecraft's heat shield was not locked in position. If the heat shield came loose, the capsule and the astronaut inside would disintegrate when they re-entered the Earth's atmosphere and temperatures reached 3,000 degrees. Worries about the heat shield continued until re-entry, and splashdown took place without incident.
Hello, Mercury Recovery. This is Friendship 7. Do you receive? Friendship 7, this is Steelhead. Be advised. is your estimate on recovery time, over? Estimate pickup now at 20 minutes, over. Landing bag is on green. Friendship 7 ready for impact, almost down. Here we go. Roger, my condition okay. Does the capsule look like it's okay, over? The capsule looks good from here, over.
Friendship 7 with John Glenn inside bobbed up and down in the ocean for 17 minutes after splashdown until the recovery ship, the USS Noah, came alongside and hoisted the capsule onto its deck. Moments later, the smiling astronaut emerged, having won a place in the history books and in the hearts of his countrymen for all time. He had become an American hero, and he would soon receive a hero's welcome. His return to the U.S. mainland after debriefing was covered in depth that evening by several major networks.
The homecoming of John Glenn. It happened this morning at Cape Canaveral, Florida, and tonight you're an eyewitness. John Glenn arrived home this morning to be met in Florida by his family.
Lucy's been bragging on you.
I know. Lucy joined me here.
Today, we decorate Colonel Glenn of the United States Marine Corps, and also realize that in the not-too-distant future, a Marine or a naval man or an Air Force man will put the American flag on the moon. I present this citation. The President of the United States takes pleasure in awarding the National Aeronautic and Space Administration Distinguished Service Medal to Lieutenant Colonel John H. Glenn, Jr.
Man is but on the threshold of this great new adventure. And perhaps in pushing out into the universe, the rivalries that divide and threaten us on Earth will be left behind. Perhaps in that lies the greatest significance of the flights of Gagarin and Shepard and Grissom and Titov and John Herschel Glenn, Jr.
An estimated 100,000 people were the next to welcome John Glenn home, recalled in the film The John Glenn Story, narrated by Jack Webb, star of the 1950s hit TV show Dragnet.
So brief a journey in time, so far the way, so long the hours for those who wait, as Annie Glenn has waited. As all the world has waited, to salute the Glenns with Vice President Lyndon Johnson.
There would be more heroes' welcomes for John Glenn. In Washington, D.C., where thousands stood in the rain to catch a glimpse of the astronaut. At the White House, where he and Annie were the guests of honor at a reception hosted by the president. In New York City, where an estimated 4 million people lined the streets in what was the biggest ticker tape parade in the city's history. And back home in New Concord, where the population was just over 2,000, but more than 75,000 turned out to say, "Good job, John Glenn." John would resign from the space program in 1964, believing his age would keep him from taking part in further missions. But as it turned out, it would be his age that would send him back into space over 3 decades later, as is recalled by former President Bill Clinton.
My most vivid memory is a call I got when I was president, saying that NASA wanted to send a mission into space, and they wanted John Glenn to go, aged 77, and he was raring to go. But they said, you know, Mr. President, we can't do this. This is outside the guidelines for a normal astronaut, unless you personally approve it. They wanted to study the effects of aging in space and whether it would slow down or be altered in any way. So I said, I'll be glad to give my permission, but you won't learn a thing about aging from John Glenn. He is ageless and fearless. So up he went at 77. I sent him an email in space when I was home in Arkansas visiting. I'll never forget it, and I'll never forget him. And neither should any other grateful American.
4, 3, 2, 0, and liftoff.
2:19 p.m. Eastern Time, October 29, 1998. The Space Shuttle Discovery lifts off from Kennedy Space Center, Florida, to spend 9 days in space. On board is someone whose face may be familiar to the vastness of the universe. Someone who may be a little older, but whose eyes are still full of wonder and whose heart is no less excited than it was one February morning so many years ago. Godspeed, John Glenn.